I did not say that. I filed it instead, the way I filed everything my consensus training told me should not require language at all. I was resolving a border dispute between the Ninth Assembly and the Karth Enclave when the summons arrived. A disagreement over mineral rights in the Threll Basin that had, by the standards of the Myrith Collective, already dragged on for an unconscionable 11 days. I was Peace Auditor Kael'thas, senior arbiter of the collective, and I had not personally overseen a conflict lasting more than a single cycle in over 300 years. This was my species' proudest achievement, the fact around which our entire civilization had reorganized itself 9 centuries ago. We had ended war, not through victory, through consensus infrastructure so complete that violence had become, structurally, unnecessary. Every grievance routed through arbitration, every resource dispute resolved by formula, every wrong assigned a remedy calculated to the decimal point by tribunals like the one I chaired. I did not have a missing limb or a scar to carry the weight of what my species had survived to get here, the way Deathworlder cultures marked their cost in flesh. Myrith marked cost differently. I wore, beneath the formal robes of my station, a small ceremonial disc fused into the skin above my sternum, a consensus seal awarded once upon completion of the long reconciliation that ended the last true Myrith War 911 years before my birth. Every arbiter wore an identical seal. It was not personal, that was the point. 9 centuries of accumulated agreement worn collectively, so that no single Myrith ever again had to carry the weight of a war alone. The summons came from the Consensus Council itself, which was unusual enough that I set aside the Threll Basin dispute. A resolution formula existed for it regardless of my presence, and reported to the Orbital Forum. A new candidate species has entered preliminary observation status, Counselor Vess informed me. Designation Human, Homeworld, a system on the Kest Expanse periphery. Survey classification Provisional, Unresolved. Unresolved is not a classification. It is the classification the survey team submitted. They could not agree on a lower one. Vess did not elaborate further, which for a Myrith counselor, a species that resolved disagreements as a professional discipline, was itself a form of alarm I logged without yet understanding. I did not expect the assignment to require more than a standard observation cycle. I brought 2 junior arbiters, Doss, who specialized in resource dispute formula and treated every unresolved variable as a personal offense, and Yara, an apprentice barely 40 years into her training, still learning to trust the collective's frameworks over her own instinct, a flaw I was meant to correct in her before we returned. The human system's provisional file described a species without unified governance, without a central arbitration body, without, and this was the detail that concerned Doss most, any formal mechanism for grievance resolution beyond localized, inconsistent, and frequently informal social codes. By Myrith standards, this was not merely primitive, it was structurally unstable. A species without consensus infrastructure should, by every model our civilization had built across 9 centuries, be locked in perpetual low-grade conflict, unable to cohere, unable to build anything requiring sustained cooperation beyond immediate kin groups. The survey data showed cities of 8 million residents functioning, however imperfectly, without a formal arbitration body governing daily conduct. I filed this as mortal inconsistency, unresolved, and began direct observation. We settled our platform in a cloaked low orbit above a temperate coastal region, and I began cataloging daily human conflict resolution behavior, expecting to document the violence our models predicted. The first anomalous data point arrived on the 3rd day, and like all anomalies I would come to catalog on this world, it announced itself as something almost too small to register. A human female, designation later confirmed as Rosa Delgado, retired educator, 61 years of age by growth rate approximation, had experienced, 6 days prior to our arrival, significant property damage. A vehicle, operated by a neighboring resident under conditions our sensor logs suggested involved impaired judgment, had destroyed a 41-foot section of wooden fencing along her property boundary. Local audio surveillance from the incident recorded a confrontation, raised voices, one instance of a garden implement thrown in evident frustration, language our translation matrix flagged as containing at minimum 4 distinct expressions of anger. By every Myrith framework, this was the opening exchange of a formal grievance, the kind that, on my world, would trigger arbitration proceedings, evidence submission, a calculated remedy, and a period of enforced distance between parties pending resolution. On the third day, Rosa Delgado walked across the damaged fence line, carrying a covered ceramic dish. I watched the encounter with Doss beside me, both of us running the exchange through resolution formula overlays that returned no coherent output because there was no formula being executed. She knocked. The neighbor, designation Frank Yablonsky, 67, recently widowed per public records, opened the door with an expression our matrix read as guarded, defensive, anticipating continued conflict. "You look thin at the funeral," she said, translated. "Eat something." There was no acknowledgement of debt, no reference to the fence, the confrontation, the thrown implement. No formal terms proposed, no remedy calculated, no witness present to validate that an exchange had even occurred. She handed him the dish, said something further our matrix rendered as a comment about his roof gutters, needing attention before the next storm season, and walked back across the same damaged fence line as though the previous 6 days had simply not happened at all. "There is no resolution mechanism in that exchange," Doss said, and I heard in his voice the same disorientation. I felt structurally reordering something in my own processing. "There is no calculated remedy. She has forgiven a material grievance and received nothing in exchange. That is not reconciliation. That is unilateral loss." "Run it again," I said. He ran it again. The output did not change. I filed the encounter under reconciliation and told myself that evening that this was a single data point, insufficient for any structural conclusion. I did not sleep during my designated rest interval. I told myself this was orbital interference with my regulator. The catalog grew, and every entry deepened the same disorientation. I observed a marketplace dispute. 2 humans disagreeing over the price of a repaired household appliance. Voices raised. A crowd gathering the way Myrith citizens gather for a public arbitration, and watch the dispute resolve itself in under 90 seconds through an exchange of what our matrix could only classify as mutual concession without formula. Both parties simply adjusted their position slightly, arrived at a number neither had originally proposed, and shook hands, a physical contact ritual our species has no equivalent for, sealing an agreement with touch rather than seal, signature, or witnessed oath. "There was no third party," Yara said, watching beside me. She had begun over the preceding days to ask more questions than her training technically permitted. "No arbiter. They just decided, between themselves, yes." "How do they trust the outcome is fair without a neutral party to calculate it?" "I do not know," I said, and it was the first time in my career I had said those 4 words aloud to a subordinate without immediately following them with a framework that would resolve the uncertainty. Yara did not respond. I filed her silence, the same way I had begun filing everything I could not yet process. I observed 2 human children on a school playground resolve a disagreement over possession of a recreational object through a verbal exchange lasting 11 seconds and ending in laughter. No adult intervention, no formal ruling. A solution apparently invented on the spot by the children themselves and abandoned as soon as an alternative activity presented itself. Doss, reviewing the footage, offered the explanation he always offered, the simpler one, the one that let the models stand unbroken. "They're children. Undeveloped consensus reasoning. It's not resolution, it's distraction. Compare it to an adult dispute and the pattern will hold. Humans will show the conflict tendency our models predict once the stakes are real." I did not dispute him. I only asked him to keep watching. The stakes eventually became real, and the pattern he predicted did not hold. There was a public dispute 6 days into our extended observation between Rosa Delgado and a younger neighbor, a man in his 30s, designation Marcus Webb, who ran what appeared to be a small commercial repair operation from his residence and had, per the escalating record, been engaged in a genuine, sustained conflict with Rosa over a property line survey error spanning 11 months, involving 2 prior confrontations, a formal complaint filed with local municipal authority, and language on both sides our matrix flagged as containing sustained, unresolved hostility, the closest thing to true Myrith model conflict we had yet observed. Doss was almost pleased. "This is the pattern," he said. "Extended grievance, unresolved, escalating. This is what our models predicted for a species without formal arbitration." I filed his satisfaction and continued watching. On the 11th day, a storm system moved through the coastal region with an intensity local authorities classified as severe, and Marcus Webb's residence, a modest structure situated on lower ground near a drainage channel, began to flood. Rosa Delgado's residence did not. Our sensors recorded her standing at her window watching the water rise around a home whose owner had, 11 months running, treated her as an adversary in an unresolved property dispute. She put on a coat. She walked, in the storm, across the same damaged fence line and began carrying Marcus Webb's belongings out of his flooding home before he had finished making the decision to evacuate himself. "I don't need your help," Webb said, translated, his voice carrying what our matrix flagged as residual hostility even in crisis. "I don't care," Rosa said. "Grab the boxes." There was no resolution formula executed in that exchange. There was no calculated exchange of value. No acknowledgement of debt settled, no formal transition from conflict to cooperation, logged anywhere our systems could parse. She simply decided the flood mattered more than the fence, more than 11 months of unresolved grievance, and acted on that decision without waiting for anyone, including, it seemed, herself, to formally approve it first. Doss said nothing. I did not fill his silence with the framework he was searching for, because I no longer trusted that the framework existed. It was that night, reviewing the footage for the 9th time in an interval when I should have been resting, that Yara asked the question that I would carry for the remainder of the assignment, unresolved the way Rosa Delgado apparently carried unresolved grievances every day of her life without it costing her the capacity to act. "Arbiter Kael'thes," she said. "What do we call it? When someone forgives a debt that was never even formally acknowledged as owed." "I do not know," I said again. "I do not think we have a word for it. I think we built our entire civilization specifically so that we would never need one." I meant it as an observation. Hearing it aloud, I understood it as something closer to an indictment, though of what, precisely, I could not yet say. The crisis, when it came, arrived through our own failure, not the storm's. Our platform's atmospheric shielding, degraded by the same weather system, flooding Marcus Webb's residence, developed a containment fracture during a routine repositioning maneuver on the 14th day. Doss caught the fault 8 seconds before critical failure, insufficient time for a controlled displacement. We went down hard, in daylight, in full view of a residential coastal street, our cloak failing entirely on impact. The platform's hull cracked open across a stretch of pavement not 40 meters from Rosa Delgado's damaged fence line. Collective protocol was explicit on uncontacted world crisis procedure. A cloaked platform experiencing catastrophic failure in populated territory executes immediate emergency evacuation to the nearest secure extraction point, accepting total equipment loss, and crew members render no assistance to and accept no assistance from local sentience under any circumstance. To preserve the integrity of eventual first contact protocol, I gave the order. Yara's evacuation beacon failed to activate. The same containment fracture that had brought us down had corrupted the beacon's guidance array. We were grounded, exposed, and Doss's lower carapace had been crushed against a support strut during impact in a way that made independent movement, by his own diagnostic readout, structurally impossible without assistance neither Yara nor I, both smaller-framed arbiters, could physically provide alone. I do not fully know, even now, what made me transmit an open distress signal instead of attempting silent extraction regardless of Doss's injury. In direct violation of every article of collective first contact doctrine I had spent 300 years enforcing on other species' behalf, I told the review tribunal, later, that silent extraction under Doss's condition carried an unacceptable probability of fatal outcome for him, and that this justified the protocol breach on medical grounds alone. That was true. It was not the entire truth. The entire truth was that I had spent 14 days watching a woman forgive debts no one asked her to forgive, carry belongings out of a flooding home for a man who had told her to her own face that he did not want her help. And some part of my consensus-trained architecture had concluded, without formal authorization, that if any species on this planet was going to encounter something broken and frightened on their doorstep, it should be encountered near the one human I had already catalogued as constitutionally unable to look at a problem and walk past it. Rosa Delgado was the first to reach the wreckage. She did not run a threat assessment. She did not, per any framework I understood, calculate whether assisting an unidentified crashed object was in her rational self-interest. She saw a downed vehicle-shaped structure with visible damage, and, the same way she had seen a flooding house belonging to a man she had spent 11 months in conflict with, she simply walked toward the problem. "Marcus," she shouted, translated, toward the residence she had evacuated 4 days earlier and helped rebuild since. "Something crashed. Get the flashlight." Marcus Webb arrived within 90 seconds. The man who had told Rosa Delgado he did not need her help during a flood knelt beside her at the crash site without hesitation, prying at the fractured hull with a metal tool from his own repair equipment, the two of them working in a coordination that bore no trace of 11 months of unresolved property disputes, because, I understood, watching them, the dispute had simply stopped mattering the moment a more immediate problem presented itself, and neither of them appeared to require a formal process to arrive at that conclusion. They found Doss first, largest, most visibly injured. Rosa did not ask what he was. She said, translated, "Oh God, okay, we're not gonna hurt you. Hang on," to a creature with no facial architecture resembling anything in her species' evolutionary history, and began directing Marcus on how to brace the fractured hull section, trapping his lower carapace, her voice steady in a register I now recognized from 14 days of cataloging, not as the absence of fear, but as fear given somewhere useful to go instead of paralysis. She found me next, pinned by debris against what would have been, on a human, my lower spine. She did not wait for permission or explanation. She simply reached in and began clearing debris with her bare hands, saying, to no one in particular, the way Rosa Delgado apparently narrated every crisis she encountered, "I don't know what you are, and I genuinely don't care right now. Just stay still, we're gonna get this off you." It was in that moment, freed from wreckage by hands belonging to a species I had rated, by every formula my civilization had ever built, structurally incapable of stable cooperation without formal arbitration, that I understood my consensus seal had never meant what 900 years of Myrith doctrine told me it meant. I had believed it meant we built the machinery so that mercy would never again depend on any single person's capacity to give it freely. Held against Rosa Delgado's bare hands clearing debris off an unidentified alien body, she had no formal obligation to help. I understood it meant something far smaller and far less complete. My species had built machinery specifically so that we would never have to trust each other enough to forgive without it. I did not say any of this to her. I filed it instead, because filing was the only vocabulary my training had given me for something this large, and even as she helped Marcus haul me clear of the wreckage, still narrating instructions to a colleague she had been in open conflict with 3 weeks earlier, I cataloged the sensation the only way I knew how. Structural realignment, category unresolved, severity, total. The review came 11 days later, aboard the recovery vessel that extracted us under emergency containment protocol, a protocol that should, by every article of collective law, have ended my arbitration commission permanently. Counselor Vess presided personally, which told me the gravity of the breach before she spoke. "You transmitted an open distress signal in populated territory," she said. "You permitted direct physical contact and assistance from uncontacted local sentients. In violation of first contact doctrine you yourself have enforced against 17 other candidate species. Do you dispute the record?" "I do not dispute the record." "Then explain to this council why your commission should not be revoked." I had prepared formal documentation. I did not read from it. I found that the resolution formula language I had built my entire identity around for 300 years no longer contained the argument I needed to make, and I had no other vocabulary available, so I built the case from evidence instead of doctrine, and let the record carry what the formulas could not. "Counselor, I have resolved 411 formal disputes across 3 centuries of service. I have built my career on the principle that mercy without structure is unreliable, that forgiveness requires calculation to be trustworthy, that a species without our consensus infrastructure cannot be stable. I have 18 days of continuous observation of a human woman who forgave a material debt with a meal instead of a formula, who carried a hostile neighbor's belongings out of a flood, without waiting for reconciliation to be formally declared. and who cleared crash debris off an unidentified alien body with her bare hands while actively narrating that she did not care what I was. I do not have a resolution formula for what I witnessed. I am not certain one exists. I am certain that a species capable of forgiveness without structure, on this consistent a base, cannot be filed under the classification our survey assigned. You are describing behavior, Vess said, though I noted, filing it carefully, that her voice had lost the edge it carried at the tribunal's opening. Not a structural conclusion. Then let the council draw the structural conclusion itself. I am only certain of the evidence. I recommend the classification model be reviewed, not merely this species' place within it. The chamber held silent long enough that I believed, filing the silence, that I had achieved nothing at all. Your commission is suspended pending formal inquiry, Vess said finally. Not revoked. The classification stands provisional, pending extended review, at a status this council has not previously used. She paused. Uncertain. Formally logged as uncertain, Arbiter. That is not the outcome you argued for. It is more than I believed I would receive. I wrote my formal assessment over the following days in the technical language the tribunal required. Exposure durations, behavioral frequency data, cross-referenced incident timestamps. Buried in the final appendix, where doctrine did not require sentiment and therefore would not scrutinize it, I wrote, Subject Rosa Delgado demonstrates repeated, unprompted forgiveness of unresolved material grievance without formula, calculation, or third-party validation, at a frequency inconsistent with every model of unstructured conflict societies in collective records. I cannot certify this species requires our intervention to achieve stability. I can certify only that I do not understand the mechanism by which they achieve it without one, and that after 300 years believing mercy requires machinery, I no longer believe that with the certainty my training assumed I would carry for the remainder of my service. The report moved up the chain to counselors who had never had bare hands clear wreckage from around their fractured carapace, who would read frequency data and decide, eventually, what the Kest Expanse candidate would become in collective registry. I returned to standard duty once the inquiry closed without formal sanction, a mercy I had not expected and was no longer certain I could explain through any formula I still trusted. I keep an unofficial file now, one no tribunal has requested. Passive surveillance confirms Rosa Delgado is unchanged. She has continued, in the months since our contact, to bring meals to neighbors she has argued with, to help with tasks no one asked her to help with, to walk toward problems the moment they present themselves rather than waiting for permission or formula to arrive first. Marcus Webb rebuilt the fence himself, unprompted, 6 weeks after the flood, an act our surveillance flagged, and I filed, under the same unresolved category as everything else on this world I have stopped expecting to resolve. I do not wear my consensus seal the way I once did. It is still fused above my sternum. It will remain there for the rest of my service. But I no longer look at it and see 900 years of a problem solved. I see now 900 years of a question my species answered so thoroughly, we forgot it was still a question at all. What does mercy cost? When no one is required to give it, and someone gives it anyway, I do not know if I will encounter Rosa Delgado again. My counsel has not authorized further contact, and I have not requested it, though the request remains drafted, unsent, in the same file as everything else about this world I have not yet closed. If it comes to that, if some future crisis brings me into range of a species my own doctrine still cannot fully classify, I have already decided what I will do. I am simply waiting for the moment someone asks it of me.